Hello, welcome to the homily for the third Sunday after Pentecost, as we continue to journey with Jesus and the disciples. An Australian politician once famously said, "Life wasn't meant to be easy." I don't know if you've ever read Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Travelled, but its opening line is, "Life is difficult." Now, the problem is that's not what we actually expect life to be like. We expect a nice smooth run. When that doesn't happen, we get upset. Why me? Why do these things happen to me? Why do bad things happen to good people? But then there's another level. If you're a good churchgoer, if you live a good life and you don't hurt anyone, then there's an even bigger expectation that all will be well. The prosperity gospel tells us that Christians should be blessed, and if we're not being blessed, then there's something wrong with our faith. Well, the problem is the prosperity gospel is not really a thing, and that's not the picture of life that we see in Scripture. Today, Jesus tells the disciples that the Christian life isn't meant to be easy. Very different expectations. When Jesus gathered disciples, he didn't seek out the brightest or the best, or the ones with the best CV, but ordinary, unskilled workers. That's what we were looking at last week. The only criteria for these disciples, the thing they had in common, was that they were actually willing to leave their lives behind when Jesus called them. They were ready to follow. Now today, Jesus starts to prepare these people to share his mission. This is their job description. Demonstrate what God's kingdom is like. Live it out. Live out justice and mercy and compassion and peace in the world. Interrupt and disturb the status quo and show new possibilities for healing and wholeness, truth-telling and repairing relationships. Cast out demons, or, in other words, cast out warped and destructive thinking. Heal people from sickness and teach them about God's radically different way of living. Now, that is some job description. Jesus doesn't exactly sugarcoat it. In today's gospel, he warns them that living this kind of life, going out on this kind of mission in the world, is never going to be easy. In fact, he warns them that they're going to encounter all sorts of adversity and opposition and problems. They are to be ready for those things. What do we know? Many of the apostles died, were martyred because of their determination to witness to the risen Christ against all odds. St. Paul speaks of having endured shipwrecks and beatings and imprisonment for the sake of the gospel. And even for Jesus himself, the path of pain and suffering just couldn't be avoided. The truth is, it was not meant to be easy. Being a Christian doesn't come with a nice make life simple tag, and in fact the opposite is sometimes closer to the truth. Perhaps one of the most troubling things we find in today's gospel, which is at the end of Matthew's Gospel chapter 10, is hearing Jesus talk about family tensions. Families are not necessarily going to be supportive. In our culture, we tend to idolise the nuclear family, so we like to downplay family conflict. It's embarrassing to talk about it. Admitting that our families are imperfect can feel really wrong. If you want to find a Brady Bunch picture of family life, then stay right away from the Bible. Strained relationships, jealousy, favouritism, anger, stress, even rape and murder are common in Old Testament stories about families. Now that's a relief, because it means we don't have to live up to any impossible ideal standard of what family life is, and our own dysfunctional family lives can begin to seem pretty normal. But it does say families are not always supportive. Jesus made it clear to his own mother and brothers that his first priority in life was the ministry that God gave him, and that didn't go so well. A Sermon on the Mount way of living that's focused on the kingdom and on kingdom values rather than making money, that's prepared to speak truth to power, that's prepared always to call out injustice wherever it's found, makes us stand out. And it's not always in a good way. A world that is obsessed about money and power and possessions and that rates people's value accordingly doesn't rate a truth teller. Living out and speaking out the Jesus way of being, the way of peace and mercy and compassion, incites harassment and resistance. Why? Because it opposes all our cultural norms. The Black Lives Matter movement has reminded us lately of the powerful civil rights message Martin Luther King sent to the world, that people could be equal. I have a dream, he said in his most famous speech, and guess what? He was the conscience of his generation, and he was assassinated for his courage. There are many such stories. This Sermon on the Mount way of being caused trouble for Jesus, and it will undoubtedly cause trouble for us, unless we're hiding our faith under a rock. And although we're unlikely to face death or martyrdom for our faith in our country and our day, we may not be popular. We may even be ostracised by our friends or our neighbours or our families. But that's what it means to take up our cross. That following is about taking up our cross. It took years of hanging out with Jesus, eating with him, watching him heal the sick in mind and body, hear him speak truth to power, listening to his teachings. It took years of those things to become the kind of people who were willing to lose their lives as martyrs, testifying to God's peace in a world preoccupied even then with power and violence. When life is tough and when we're misunderstood or called rude names, the promise Jesus gives us is that we're not alone and that we never will be. The Christian life isn't and wasn't meant to be easy. But God cares for us so intimately that even the hairs of our head are numbered and known. Just as God watches over even the tiniest little bird, the sparrow, it tells us, so God cares for us. Whatever life is like, whenever it's not easy, these are the things we have to remember. The Lord be with you.